She's lying. Ethan Brooks didn't raise his voice, but the words cut clean through the swarm of cameras like glass snapping under pressure. And just like that, the noise collapsed into something tighter, sharper, expectant. Dozens of lenses locking onto Naomi Carter as if they could peel the truth straight off her skin. She didn't move. Not when the microphones pushed closer. Not when someone in the crowd let out a quiet scoff. Not even when Ethan adjusted the cuff of his tailored suit. Like this was just another press statement about quarterly earnings instead of a life unraveling in real time. The late afternoon light bounced off the steel and glass of the building behind them, turning everything colder than it should have been, and Naomi stood there in a simple navy dress, fingers wrapped around a small, folded baby blanket she hadn't realized she was gripping so tightly until her knuckles turned pale. "Miss Carter," a reporter called out, voice eager, almost hungry. "Are you accusing Mr. Brooks of being the father of your child?" And there it was, the word hanging in the air like something fragile and dangerous at the same time. Child. But Naomi didn't answer right away, her eyes steady, not on the cameras, not on the reporters, but on Ethan, because he wouldn't look at her, not directly, his gaze drifting just past her shoulder like she was a shadow cast by something inconvenient. A few feet away, one of his attorneys leaned in, whispering something quick and precise, and Ethan gave the slightest nod, the kind of movement that signaled control, authority, finality. Then he stepped forward half an inch, just enough for the microphones to catch him clearly. "There is no truth to these claims," he said, measured, composed, practiced, and the crowd reacted exactly how crowds always do. A ripple of murmurs, a few raised brows, the flicker of doubt spreading faster than facts ever could, and Naomi felt it, not as noise, but as weight, like the air itself had thickened. Around her chest, somewhere behind her, a car door slammed, sharp and distant, and for a second it pulled her mind somewhere else, a quieter place, a memory she didn't let herself linger in, because this moment demanded stillness, demanded presence, demanded that she not break, not here, not in front of people who had already decided who she was. Then why come forward now? Another voice pressed, sharper this time, and Naomi finally shifted, just slightly, enough to loosen her grip on the blanket, the soft fabric brushing against her wrist, grounding her, reminding her why she was standing here at all. She took a breath, slow, controlled, the kind you take when you know every word that follows will be measured, judged, twisted, and still you speak anyway. "I didn't come for money," she said, her voice quieter than his but somehow harder to ignore, because it didn't try to dominate the space. It simply existed in it, steady, unshaken, and for the first time Ethan's eyes flickered toward her, just for a second, just long enough for something unspoken to pass between them, something neither of them named, something the cameras couldn't quite capture. A reporter leaned in again, sensing the shift. "Then what do you want?" And Naomi's gaze didn't waver this time, not from him, not from the moment, her fingers finally relaxing around the blanket as it slipped slightly open, revealing the edge of something impossibly small, impossibly real, and she answered without raising her voice, without anger, without pleading, just truth, plain and unprotected. "I want you to stop pretending you don't recognize your own reflection." The first camera flash hit her eyes like a sharp pulse of white, then another, then 10 more, a rapid staccato that turned the sidewalk into something unreal, like she had stepped into a place where truth had to fight to be seen. Naomi did not step back, even as the noise surged again, questions stacking over each other, voices reaching, pulling, demanding something from her she was no longer willing to give away for free, and beside her, Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose, the faintest sign of irritation breaking through the polished calm he had worn like armor. His attorney moved closer, placing a firm hand at his elbow, guiding him half a step away from the chaos. But Ethan did not leave yet, not fully, because something in what she had said lingered, something inconvenient, something he could not immediately file away as irrelevant. "We are done here," the attorney announced, voice crisp, authoritative. But the reporters did not stop, they never stopped, and Naomi could feel the ground beneath her heels, the subtle vibration of traffic passing somewhere beyond the barricades. The city moving forward whether she was ready or not. She lowered her gaze just briefly, not in defeat, but to the small fold of fabric in her hands, smoothing it once with her thumb, a quiet, automatic gesture, and for a second the world narrowed to that softness, that warmth, that reminder of a life that did not belong to headlines or statements or denials. "Miss Carter, is the baby here?" someone called out, louder this time, and a ripple passed through the crowd, curiosity sharpening into something almost electric, and Naomi lifted her head again, her expression unchanged, but there was something steadier in her eyes now, something that had settled into place. Ethan turned then, fully this time, his gaze landing on the blanket as if noticing it for the first time, really noticing it, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a reaction so small most would miss it, but it was there, a fracture in the surface. "There is no baby," he said, but the words did not land the same way. They had before, not as clean, not as certain, and Naomi heard it. The difference, the slight hesitation wrapped in control. She did not argue, did not raise her voice, did not step forward. Instead, she simply shifted the blanket again, just enough for the edge to open a little more, revealing the faintest glimpse of a tiny sleeve, pale blue, still, quiet, and the air changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but in that subtle way when a room realizes something it cannot unsee. No cry, no movement, just presence, and that was enough. A woman in the front lowered her phone slightly, her expression flickering from skepticism to something else, something softer, more uncertain, and Ethan's eyes did not move away this time. They stayed fixed, drawn in despite himself, as if trying to solve a problem that refused to behave like numbers on a page. The attorney leaned in again, whispering faster now, urging him to leave, to end this, to control the narrative before it slipped further. But Ethan did not respond immediately, because there it was again, that feeling, quiet but persistent, like a memory he had chosen to ignore now standing directly in front of him, asking to be acknowledged. Naomi took one small step back, not retreating, just creating space, and the city noise filled the gap between them, horns in the distance, a siren far off, the hum of something ordinary continuing around something anything but ordinary. "You can keep saying it," she said, not loudly, not accusing, just steady. "But that does not make it disappear." And this time, when Ethan finally looked away, it was not with dismissal, but with something closer to discomfort, something unfamiliar, something he could not easily control. And for the first time since the cameras started flashing, he did not speak. The crowd did not follow him immediately when he finally turned. And that was the first thing that felt wrong. Because men like Ethan Brooks were used to movement, used to people adjusting, parting, reacting the moment they decided to leave. But now there was a hesitation, a thin thread of attention still anchored behind him, and he could feel it even as he stepped toward the black car waiting at the curb. The polished surface reflecting fragments of cameras, flashes, and her silhouette still. Standing there, steady, unchanged. The driver opened the door without a word, and Ethan paused just half a second before getting in, his hand resting briefly on the edge of the door, his reflection staring back at him in the glass. Sharp suit, controlled expression, everything exactly as it should be, except for the faint crease between his brows that had not been there before. Inside the car, the door shut with a muted thud that cut off the noise outside like a switch, replacing chaos with a thick, insulated silence. And for a moment he just sat there, not giving the usual signal to move, not checking his phone, not speaking, while across from him his attorney adjusted his tie and exhaled quietly, already shifting into strategy. "We will handle this," the attorney said, voice low, measured. "We will release a statement, request a formal test, and shut this down before it gains traction." And Ethan nodded once, a small, automatic response, but his gaze drifted to the tinted window. Anyway, where the outside world blurred into streaks of color and motion, the car pulled forward smoothly, merging into traffic, and the city unfolded in front of them. Glass towers, streetlights flickering on as the sun dipped lower, everything moving forward in perfect, predictable rhythm, except his thoughts did not follow that rhythm. They circled, catching on something he could not immediately define. "There is no baby," he said again, quieter this time, almost as if testing the words in a different space, and the attorney responded instantly. "Of course not. And even if there were, we rely on evidence, not implication. But Ethan did not answer, because what lingered was not her accusation, not the reporters, not even the risk to his reputation. It was the image, small, incomplete, barely visible, and yet somehow impossible to dismiss. The faint edge of that blue fabric, the stillness, the absence of sound. It did not behave like something fabricated, and that unsettled him more than anything else. He leaned back slightly, loosening his grip on his cufflink, a habit he had when something slipped outside his control, and for a brief second, a memory surfaced uninvited, not dramatic, not emotional, just a quiet detail. A late night weeks ago, the penthouse dim except for the city lights spilling through the windows. Naomi moving through the space with that same quiet presence. Never intrusive, never demanding, just there, steady, real, and he had not thought about that in a long time, had not needed to. We should move quickly. The attorney continued, already outlining timelines, procedures, ways to contain and redirect, but Ethan's attention shifted again, not to the words, but to the reflection in the window, where the city lights now overlapped with his own face, blurring the edges, making it harder to separate what was outside from what was within. The car slowed at a red light, and for a brief moment everything paused, engines idling, headlights casting long beams across the pavement, and in that stillness, the question he had been avoiding pressed closer, quieter than everything else, but more persistent, not loud enough to be spoken, but too present to ignore. Across town, Naomi had already stepped away from the cameras, the noise fading behind her as she moved down the sidewalk. The blanket held close again, her pace unhurried, deliberate, and when she turned the corner, out of sight, the world did not follow her, but something else did, something invisible, something that had just begun. And back in the car, as the light turned green and the city resumed its motion, Ethan finally gave the signal to move, but his hand lingered for a fraction longer than usual, as if even he was not entirely sure where forward was anymore. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt earned, not empty, the kind of quiet that came after a long day of being seen and judged and held up under lights that did not belong to you. And Naomi closed the door behind her with a soft click that seemed louder than it should have been, her back resting against the wood for just a second as she let out a breath she had been holding since the cameras first flashed. The hallway outside carried the faint echo of footsteps and distant voices, neighbors moving through their own lives, unaware of how heavy hers had become in a single afternoon, and she did not rush, did not panic. She simply pushed herself upright and walked further in, the small living space greeting her with the same stillness it always had, a couch near the window, a narrow kitchen counter, a single lamp casting a warm amber glow that softened everything it touched. She moved toward the bassinet near the wall, her steps instinctively quieter now, and as she reached it, her hands relaxed, finally letting the blanket open fully, revealing the tiny shape nestled inside, wrapped carefully, breathing slow and steady, the rise and fall so subtle it felt like something sacred. Naomi stood there for a moment, just watching, her shoulders lowering as the tension slipped away piece by piece, replaced by something steadier, something deeper than fear or doubt. She brushed her fingers lightly along the edge of the blanket, not to wake the baby, just to feel the presence, to remind herself that this was real, that no amount of denial outside those walls could erase what existed right here. Across the city, high above the noise and motion, Ethan stepped into his penthouse and was met by a different kind of quiet, one that echoed, stretched, filled with space that felt larger than necessary, the glass walls reflecting the city lights in sharp lines that cut across polished floors and pristine surfaces. He loosened his jacket as he walked in, setting his keys down with a precise motion that usually grounded him. But tonight it did not settle anything, the silence pressing in instead of calming. And for the first time in a long while, the space felt less like control and more like distance. His phone buzzed on the counter, notifications stacking rapidly. Messages from his public relations team, his attorney, names that normally signaled solutions, but he did not reach for it immediately, his gaze drifting instead to the wide window overlooking the city, the lights below stretching endlessly, each one representing something concrete, something measurable, something he understood. He exhaled slowly and walked closer, hands slipping into his pockets, posture straight, composed. The image intact, yet his mind did not follow that same clarity. It circled back, again and again, to the smallest detail from earlier, something that refused to fade the way everything else usually did. The stillness of that blanket, the absence of performance, the quiet certainty in her voice when she spoke without raising it, without needing to, and he found himself replaying it not as an accusation, but as a moment, isolated, persistent. He reached for a glass on the counter, poured water, lifted it halfway, then paused, his reflection staring back at him. From the darkened window, crisp, controlled, familiar, and yet there was something slightly off, something that did not align with the certainty he had spoken with hours before. Back in the apartment, Naomi lowered herself onto the edge of the couch, the soft fabric dipping beneath her weight, and she leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees, her gaze never leaving the small bassinet. The lamp beside it casting a gentle light that warmed the space around them. Outside, a siren. Past in the distance, fading quickly, the city continuing its endless motion. But inside, time felt slower, measured not in minutes but in breaths, in the quiet rhythm of a life that did not demand attention to be real. She reached out again, this time adjusting the blanket just slightly, tucking it closer, and as she did, the baby shifted, just enough for a small hand to move, fingers curling briefly before settling again. And Naomi smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just a small, steady expression that carried more certainty than anything she had said earlier. Across the skyline, Ethan finally set the glass back down untouched, his fingers lingering against the cool surface for a moment longer than necessary. And though the city outside remained exactly the same, something inside him had begun to shift, quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the first crack in something that had always seemed unbreakable. Morning came slowly, not with brightness, but with a thin, gray light slipping through the edges of the blinds, stretching across the floor in quiet lines that did not ask permission to enter. And Naomi was already awake, sitting in the same place she had been hours before, her posture unchanged except for the softness in her shoulders that came from watching instead of waiting. The baby stirred again, a small movement beneath the blanket, and this time a faint sound followed, not a cry, not distress, just a fragile, almost questioning breath that filled the room in a way no words ever could. And Naomi leaned forward immediately, her hand instinctively finding the edge of the bassinet, her voice low and calm as she whispered something only the child needed to hear, something gentle, steady, something that carried no trace of the outside world. Across the city, Ethan stood in front of the same window he had not fully stepped away from the night before, his reflection now framed by the pale morning light, sharper, less forgiving, revealing details that the darkness had softened, and his phone rested on the counter behind him, silent now, but heavy with everything it contained, statements drafted, calls missed, expectations waiting. He turned finally, slow, deliberate, walking back toward the kitchen, each step measured like he was returning to something unfinished, and when he picked up the phone, his thumb hovered over the screen for a moment longer than necessary before unlocking it, the glow lighting up his face as headlines began to load, speculation already forming, narratives already taking shape without him. He scrolled once, then stopped, not because of what was written, but because of what was not. There was no image of the child, no proof presented, just her, standing there, calm, unwavering, and something about that absence unsettled him more than any accusation could. He set the phone down again, exhaling slowly, and reached for his jacket. The fabric smooth beneath his fingers, familiar, controlled. Something he understood, and yet even as he slipped it on, adjusting the collar with practiced ease, the quiet from the night before had not fully left him. It lingered, threading itself through his movements, making everything feel slightly delayed, slightly off. Back in the apartment, Naomi had lifted the baby now, holding the small body close against her chest, the warmth immediate, grounding, and she moved toward the window, pulling the curtain back, just enough to let the morning light touch them, soft and gentle, nothing like the harsh flashes from the day before, and she looked down, her expression calm, certain, as if the world outside had already said everything it needed to say and no longer mattered here. The baby's eyes fluttered briefly, not fully open, just a hint, a suggestion, and Naomi smiled again. That same quiet, steady expression, her thumb brushing lightly across the tiny hand that instinctively curled around it. A knock sounded faintly from somewhere down the hall, distant, not meant for her. Just another reminder that life continued in small, ordinary ways, and she shifted her weight slightly, settling into the moment rather than reacting to anything beyond it. Across town, Ethan stepped into the elevator of his building, the mirrored walls reflecting him from every angle, multiplying the image of a man who had built everything on certainty, on control, on knowing exactly where every outcome would land. And, as the door slid shut, sealing him inside that quiet, enclosed space, he caught his own eyes in the reflection, holding them there for a second longer than usual, as if searching for something he could not quite name. The elevator began its descent, smooth and silent, each floor passing without resistance. And with every second, the question he had pushed aside the day before returned, not louder, not clearer, but more present, settling into the space with him, impossible to ignore, and though he did not speak it, did not even fully form it, it stayed there, steady, waiting, as the doors opened and the day moved forward without asking whether he was ready or not. The conference room was colder than usual, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the silence that settled in before Ethan even reached his seat, a silence that followed him now in a way it never had before, subtle but noticeable, like something unspoken had already entered the room ahead of him. The long glass table reflected the overhead lights in sharp lines, and the executives seated along both sides straightened almost instinctively as he walked in, their movements precise, controlled, but their eyes lingered a fraction longer than normal, not quite meeting his, not quite avoiding him either. Caught somewhere in between curiosity and caution, Ethan placed his folder down at the head of the table. With a soft, deliberate motion, the sound barely audible, yet it seemed to mark the beginning of something none of them had prepared for. "Let us begin," he said, voice steady, familiar, the same tone that had closed deals worth millions, the same tone that built trust and commanded attention. And yet as the meeting moved forward, numbers appeared on screens, projections discussed, strategies outlined. Something beneath it all felt misaligned, like a rhythm slightly offbeat. A presentation shifted to quarterly performance, graphs rising in clean, predictable arcs, and one of the analysts spoke with confidence about growth margins. But Ethan's gaze drifted, not to the data, but to the reflection of the screen in the polished surface of the table, where colors blurred into something less defined, less certain. His fingers rested lightly against the edge of the table, tapping once, then stilling, and for a brief second, the image from the day before surfaced again, not loud, not demanding, just present, the small blue sleeve, the quiet stillness, the absence of anything performative, and he found himself holding on to that detail longer than he should have. "Ethan," someone prompted gently, pulling him back, and he blinked once, refocusing, offering a short nod as if nothing had shifted at all, but the pause had already been noticed, subtle, but there, across the room, a senior partner adjusted his glasses, glancing briefly at another colleague, a silent exchange, passing between them, not judgment, not yet, but awareness. The meeting continued, words filling the space, but Ethan's responses came a fraction slower, his usual precision softened by something he could not immediately correct, and though no one said anything, the difference existed, small but undeniable. Miles away, Naomi stepped into a modest clinic, the fluorescent lights overhead humming faintly, casting a clean but unforgiving brightness across the waiting area, and she moved quietly to the front desk, her voice low as she checked in, the baby resting against her shoulder, wrapped carefully, the soft rise and fall of breath steady and reassuring. A nurse glanced up, offering a polite smile, but her eyes softened slightly when she looked at the child, a brief moment of recognition, not of identity, but of vulnerability, of something worth protecting. Naomi took a seat, the plastic chair cool beneath her, and she adjusted the blanket gently, ensuring the baby remained comfortable, her movements practiced, calm, as if the world outside had no permission to enter this space. The television mounted in the corner played muted news footage, captions scrolling beneath images that moved too quickly to matter, but for a split second, Naomi's own image appeared among them, frozen mid-frame, her expression steady, unshaken, and she looked away before the clip could linger, her focus returning immediately to what was in her arms. Back in the boardroom, Ethan leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose, and, for the first time since the meeting began, he did not look at the screen, he looked at his hands instead, at the way they rested there, controlled, composed, and yet not entirely still. The room continued around him, voices rising and falling, decisions forming. But somewhere beneath it all, something had shifted, quietly but permanently, and though he had not spoken it, not even to himself, the certainty he once carried without question no longer felt as solid as it had the day before. The nurse called her name softly, almost gently, as if aware that anything louder might break the fragile calm Naomi had built around herself, and she stood without hesitation, adjusting the baby against her shoulder before following down the narrow hallway where the fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the scent of antiseptic lingered in the air. The examination room was small, clean, ordinary, the kind of place where lives were measured in quiet checkups and careful notes rather than headlines. And Naomi eased into the chair as the nurse checked the baby's vitals with practiced hands, her movements efficient but kind, a balance that did not go unnoticed. "He is doing well," the nurse said after a moment, her voice carrying a warmth that felt real, not rehearsed, and Naomi nodded, her fingers resting lightly on the baby's back, feeling the steady rhythm of breath beneath her palm, grounding her in a way nothing else could. Across town, the meeting had ended, but the tension had not. It followed Ethan into his office like a shadow that refused to stay behind, and he closed the door with a quiet click that echoed longer than it should have, the glass walls around him offering a view of the city that usually felt like power but now felt like distance. His assistant had left a stack of documents on his desk, neatly aligned, each one representing decisions that needed to be made, but he did not sit immediately. Instead, he remained standing, his gaze drifting again to the reflection in the glass, the outline of himself layered over the skyline beyond, sharp and controlled on the surface, but not entirely still beneath it. His phone buzzed once on the desk, then again, and this time he reached for it, unlocking the screen with a motion that felt automatic, almost detached, and a message from his attorney filled the display, concise, direct, outlining next steps, requesting confirmation for a formal test to resolve the matter quickly and definitively. And Ethan read it once, then again, the words clear, logical, structured, everything he had built his world on, and yet something about them felt incomplete, like a solution that addressed everything except the one thing that lingered. He set the phone down slowly, his fingers resting against the edge of the desk as his mind circled back, not to the accusation, not to the risk, but to the moment he had not been able to dismiss, the stillness, the absence of fear in her voice, the way she had not tried to convince him, only stated something as if it already existed beyond his approval. In the clinic, Naomi listened as the doctor entered, his tone professional but softened by the presence of the child, and he spoke about growth, about care, about the next few weeks, each word practical, grounded, real, and Naomi absorbed it all with quiet focus, asking only what mattered, never more, never less, her priorities clear in a way that did not require explanation. When the appointment ended, she stood again, thanking them with a small nod, her voice steady, and as she stepped back into the hallway, the outside world felt distant again, reduced to something secondary, something that could wait. Back in the office, Ethan finally sat down, the chair adjusting beneath him with a soft mechanical sound, and he leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the desk, hands loosely clasped, his posture composed but not entirely relaxed. And for the first time since the previous day, he allowed the question to surface fully, not as a passing thought, not as something to dismiss, but as something to consider, and though he did not say it aloud, the weight of it settled into the room with him, quiet but undeniable, as he reached for his phone once more, not with certainty this time, but with something closer to hesitation. The phone vibrated once in his hand, not loudly, not urgently, just enough to remind him that decisions were waiting to be made, and Ethan stared at the message on the screen longer than necessary, The words from his attorney still there, precise, efficient, offering a path forward that required no emotion, only confirmation, only action, and yet his thumb did not move. The office around him remained exactly as it always had, glass walls, clean lines, everything in its place, but the stillness felt different now, heavier, as if it was no longer holding control, but asking for something in return. He leaned back slowly in his chair, the leather creasing beneath him, and exhaled through his nose, his gaze drifting again to the skyline beyond the glass, where the afternoon light had begun to soften, stretching shadows across the city in long, quiet patterns. Somewhere below, traffic moved in steady lines, people crossing streets, lives continuing without pause, and for a moment he wondered how something so small, so contained, had managed to follow him into every space he occupied. Across town, Naomi stepped out of the clinic into the open air, the sunlight warmer now, softer against her skin, and she adjusted the baby carefully, one hand supporting the small back, the other shielding the face slightly from the brightness, her movements instinctive, protective, and she paused just outside the entrance, not because she needed to, but because there was no reason to rush. The city noise surrounded her again, distant conversations, the low hum of passing cars, the rhythm of a world that did not know her story and did not need to. And she took a slow breath, grounding herself in the ordinary, in the present, in what was real. A woman passed by and glanced briefly at the baby, offering a small smile, nothing more, just a simple acknowledgement. And Naomi returned it with a quiet nod before continuing down the sidewalk, her pace steady, unhurried. Back in the office, Ethan finally set the phone down without responding, the screen dimming as it rested against the desk, and he leaned forward, elbows resting lightly, his hands clasping and unclasping once as if testing the space between decision and hesitation. He stood then, abruptly but not forcefully, the movement breaking the stillness, and crossed the room toward the window, his reflection meeting him again in the glass. But this time he did not look past it, he looked directly at it, holding his own gaze as if expecting it to offer something back. For a brief second, the image of that small sleeve returned again, not as a question, not as doubt, but as something that existed whether he acknowledged it or not. And he felt it settle somewhere deeper than logic, somewhere that could not be managed with statements or strategy. Outside, Naomi reached a bus stop and paused, shifting the baby slightly as she waited, the metal bench cool beneath her as she sat, the city continuing around her in quiet indifference, and she looked down again, her expression unchanged, steady, certain, as if everything that mattered was already within reach. A breeze moved through the street, light but noticeable, brushing against her face, lifting the edge of the blanket just enough for a second glimpse. And she adjusted it again without thinking, her hand gentle, precise, protective. Across the glass wall high above the city, Ethan lifted his hand slightly, resting it against the cool surface, the temperature grounding him in the moment. And for the first time since this began, he did not think about what others would say, or how it would be handled, or what it would cost. He thought only about what he had seen, and what he had chosen not to see, and the difference between the two lingered. There, quiet, undeniable, as the city stretched endlessly beyond him, and the silence inside the room refused to offer him an easy way out. The bus arrived with a low mechanical sigh, brakes releasing in a soft hiss that blended into the steady rhythm of the street, and Naomi stood without hesitation, adjusting the baby against her shoulder before stepping forward with the same quiet certainty she had carried all day, her movements unhurried, unshaken, as if the world had already tested her and found nothing to take. Inside, the bus was half full, a mix of people lost in their own routines, headphones in, eyes down, conversations low and distant, and she moved toward an empty seat near the middle, lowering herself carefully, one hand supporting the small weight she carried, the other gripping the edge of the seat, just long enough to steady herself before letting go. The engine rumbled beneath the floor as the bus pulled away from the curb, the motion smooth, predictable, and Naomi leaned back slightly, her gaze drifting to the window where the city passed in fragments, storefronts, streetlights, reflections sliding across the glass in quiet succession, none of it demanding her attention, none of it able to pull her away from the warmth resting against her chest. The baby shifted again, just a small movement, and Naomi looked down immediately, her expression softening, her hand rising instinctively to adjust the blanket, her fingers brushing gently along the edge as if confirming something only she could feel. Across town, Ethan stood alone in his office, the light outside beginning to fade into evening, casting longer shadows across the floor, and the glass walls that once felt expansive now reflected more of him than the world beyond, trapping his image in a way that felt unfamiliar. He had not returned to the desk, had not responded to the message, had not called anyone to regain control of the narrative, and the silence had stretched long enough to become something else entirely, not absence, but presence, something waiting. His phone remained where he had left it, the screen dark now, and when he finally moved, it was not toward it, but toward the door, his steps measured, deliberate, as if each one required a decision he had not yet fully made. He paused with his hand on the handle, the cool metal grounding him for a brief second, and his reflection in the glass beside it caught his eye again. But this time he did not hold the gaze. He looked away first. The hallway outside was quieter than usual, most of the staff already gone. The hum of the building softened into something almost distant, and Ethan walked through it without acknowledging anyone, his pace steady but not rushed, as if he was following something he could not see but could no longer ignore. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and he stepped inside, the mirrored walls surrounding him again, reflecting him from every angle. But this time he did not look at them. He kept his eyes forward, fixed on the closed doors as they slid shut, sealing him in a space where there was nothing to distract from the thought that had finally settled fully into place. On the bus, Naomi shifted slightly as the vehicle turned, the motion causing the blanket to loosen just enough for a small face to become partially visible, still, peaceful, untouched by the noise of the world. And for a brief second, the baby's eyes opened, not fully, just a flicker, a quiet glimpse, but enough to reveal something unmistakable in the shape, in the depth, in the reflection of light that caught in them before they closed again. Naomi saw it, of course she did, and her expression did not change, because she had never needed confirmation, she had only needed truth. The bus continued forward, merging into the flow of traffic, carrying her further from the noise of the day, while across the city, the elevator descended floor by floor, each number lighting up in quiet sequence, and with every passing level, Ethan's reflection in the metal doors grew sharper, clearer, until finally he saw it not as a surface, but as something he could no longer avoid. And though he did not speak, the realization settled in the space with him, steady, undeniable, as the doors opened and he stepped out into a night that felt different than the one before. The night air felt different the moment Ethan stepped outside, cooler, sharper, carrying a weight that did not belong to the temperature, but to the decision forming quietly beneath his thoughts, and he paused just beyond the glass doors of the building, the city stretching out before him in lines of light and motion that usually felt like something he owned, something he controlled, but tonight it felt distant, like something he was only passing through. His driver pulled the car forward, smoothly, stopping at the curb with practiced precision, but Ethan did not move immediately, his gaze fixed somewhere ahead, not on any one thing, but on the space between, where the noise of the day seemed to echo back in fragments, her voice, the stillness, the absence of urgency, all of it refusing to fade the way it should have. "Sir?" the driver prompted quietly, and Ethan blinked once, as if returning from somewhere farther than the sidewalk in front of him, then nodded slightly, and stepped into the car, the door closing with a soft, final sound that sealed him into another layer of quiet. "Where to?" the driver asked, already preparing to follow routine, to return him to the penthouse, to the same controlled environment that had always made sense. But Ethan did not answer right away, his hand resting loosely against his knee, fingers still, his gaze fixed on the dark window where the city lights blurred into streaks. For a moment, the silence stretched, and then he spoke, his voice low, steady, but not as certain as it had been before. "Drive," he said, not giving a destination, not offering direction, and the driver hesitated only briefly before pulling away, merging into the flow of traffic without question. The car moved through the city, Passing intersections, storefronts, people walking under streetlights. All of it ordinary, all of it distant, and Ethan leaned back slightly, his head resting against the seat, his eyes not closing but unfocused, as if he was searching for something within the movement itself. Across town, Naomi stepped off the bus and onto a quieter street, the noise fading behind her as the doors closed and the vehicle continued on, leaving her in a space that felt more familiar, more contained, and she adjusted the baby gently, one hand supporting the small weight as she walked toward her building, the soft glow of a street lamp casting warm light across the sidewalk. Her steps were steady, unhurried, and when she reached the entrance, she paused just long enough to shift the blanket slightly, ensuring the baby remained comfortable, her touch careful, practiced, and she pushed the door open with her shoulder, stepping inside where the air was warmer, quieter, holding a stillness that felt like relief. Back in the car, Ethan's phone buzzed again, persistent now, and he picked it up without looking at the screen immediately, his thumb hovering as if the act of unlocking it required more than habit this time. And when he finally did, the message from his attorney remained at the top, unchanged, waiting for confirmation, waiting for action, waiting for him to follow the path that had always worked before. He stared at it, reading the words again, then once more, and for a brief second, the image returned, not forced, not summoned. Just there, the small glimpse of a face, the quiet stillness, the eyes that had opened just enough to be seen, and something in his chest tightened, not sharply, not painfully, but enough to be noticed, enough to disrupt the steady rhythm he relied on. He lowered the phone slightly, his gaze shifting back to the window, where the city lights moved in endless patterns, and without fully deciding, without fully explaining it even to himself, he leaned forward just enough to break the stillness. "Turn around," he said, the words quiet but firm, and the driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror, surprised for only a second before nodding and signaling, the car shifting lanes, changing direction, and as the city began to rearrange itself around them, Ethan's hand tightened slightly against the edge of the seat, not with fear, not with certainty, but with something in between, something that had finally begun to move. The car slowed as it turned onto a quieter street, the hum of the city fading into something softer, more distant, and Ethan leaned forward slightly, his eyes scanning the passing buildings with a focus that felt unfamiliar, not strategic, not calculated, but searching. The streetlights cast warm pools of light along the sidewalk, illuminating doorways, windows, small details that would have gone unnoticed before. And when the car finally came to a stop, he did not ask if this was the right place. He knew, not from memory, but from something deeper, something that had followed him here without explanation. "Wait here," he said quietly, already reaching for the handle before the driver could respond, and the night air met him again. Cooler now, carrying the faint scent of rain from somewhere far off, grounding him in a way the glass and steel of his world never had. He stood still for a moment on the sidewalk, looking up at the modest building in front of him, its windows dim, its entrance simple, nothing about it demanding attention, nothing about it reflecting power, and yet his chest tightened slightly, not from hesitation, but from the weight of what he had brought with him. Inside, Naomi had just settled the baby back into the bassinet, the small room quiet except for the soft rhythm of breathing and the occasional creak of the building as it shifted with the night, and she moved toward the sink, rinsing her hands slowly, the water running in a steady stream that filled the silence without breaking it. When the knock came, it was soft, almost careful, not the kind that demanded, but the kind that asked, and Naomi paused, her hands still beneath the water, her head turning slightly toward the door, as if confirming what she had heard. The knock came again, just as quiet, just as measured, and she reached for a towel, drying her hands with deliberate calm before walking toward the door, her steps unhurried, her expression unchanged. When she opened it, the hallway light framed him there, his figure outlined in a way that made him look both familiar and out of place at the same time, and for a second, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching between them, not empty, but full of everything that had already been said and everything that had not. Ethan's gaze met hers, not sliding away this time, not deflecting, and there was something different in it, not certainty, not yet, but something closer to acknowledgement, something that did not need to be explained. "I did not come for statements," he said finally, his voice low, steady, but stripped of the sharp edges it once carried. And Naomi did not move, did not step aside. She simply looked at him, measuring the space between his words and his presence. The room behind her remained quiet, the soft glow of the lamp spilling into the hallway. And for a brief second, the sound of the baby's breathing carried just far enough to be heard. A small, steady rhythm that existed regardless of who stood at the door. Ethan heard it. Of course he did. And something in his posture shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible, as if that sound had reached a place logic could not. "Then why are you here?" Naomi asked, her voice calm, not defensive, not inviting, just present. And Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze lowering for the first time, not in avoidance, but in thought, as if searching for words that did not come easily to him anymore. "Because I cannot ignore it anymore," he said. And when he looked up again, the distance that had defined every moment before this was no longer there in the same way. It had narrowed, not completely, not perfectly, but enough to matter. Naomi stepped back then, not as permission, not as surrender, but as acknowledgement of something that had shifted, and Ethan crossed the threshold slowly, the space inside smaller than any room he had been in that day, yet heavier, more real. And as the door closed behind him with a soft, final click, the world outside faded again, leaving only the quiet, the light, and the truth he had finally chosen to face. The room felt smaller once the door closed, not because of its size, but because of what it held: the quiet, the light, the presence of something that did not bend to status or denial. And Ethan stood just inside for a moment, not moving forward, not speaking, as if he understood that whatever came next could not be rushed or controlled the way everything else in his life had been. Naomi did not guide him, did not fill the silence. She simply turned and walked back toward the bassinet, her movement steady, natural, as if she had already accepted that this moment would come, and whether he was ready or not did not change that. The lamp beside the wall cast a warm glow across the small space, softening the edges of everything. And when Ethan followed, his steps slowed, not out of hesitation alone, but because something in the air demanded it, something that made noise feel out of place. The bassinet sat near the window, simple, unremarkable, and yet as he approached, it became the only thing that mattered, the rest of the room fading into the background. And Naomi stopped beside it, her hand resting lightly on the edge, not protective in a way that pushed him away, but grounded, as if anchoring the moment. She did not speak. She did not explain. She simply stepped slightly to the side, creating space, and that gesture said more than any words could have. Ethan's breath slowed, his shoulders lowering just enough to betray the shift inside him. And when he finally looked down, truly looked, there was no room left for distance, no space for interpretation, only what was there, small, real, undeniable. The baby lay quietly, wrapped in the same soft fabric he had seen before, the rise and fall of breath steady, the stillness not empty but complete. And for a second, nothing moved, not him, not Naomi, not even the air between them. Then the baby stirred, just slightly, a small movement that seemed almost too gentle to notice, and the blanket shifted enough for the face to become fully visible, the features soft, new, untouched by anything beyond this room. And then the eyes opened. It was not dramatic, not sudden, just a slow, natural motion, and yet everything in Ethan's body reacted at once, not with shock, but with recognition, something immediate, something that bypassed thought entirely, and he felt it before he could name it, in the tightening of his chest, in the way his breath caught just enough to matter. The eyes were clear, steady in a way that did not belong to something so small, and the reflection of the lamp's light rested in them, creating a quiet depth that felt familiar in a way he could not deny, not because someone told him, not because of proof or argument, but because he had seen that same reflection before, countless times, in places he trusted without question. His hand moved slightly, almost without permission, hovering near the edge of the bassinet, but not touching, as if unsure whether he had the right to close that distance. And for the first time since any of this began, there were no words forming, no statement waiting, no defense ready, Only silence, heavy and honest. Naomi watched him, not with expectation, not with triumph, but with a calm that came from knowing she had never needed to convince him, only to allow him to see. And the room held that stillness, holding both of them in a moment that could not be undone. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible, and his gaze did not leave the child, because now there was nothing left to look away from, nothing left to deny. And though he did not speak, did not reach, did not even fully move, something inside him shifted completely, quietly, finally, as the truth settled into place without asking for permission. The silence did not break when the baby's eyes slowly closed again. It deepened, settling into the room like something that had finally found where it belonged, and Ethan remained where he was, his hand still hovering near the edge of the bassinet, not touching, not pulling away, suspended between what he had been and what he could no longer pretend to be. The city outside continued as it always had. Distant traffic, faint voices, the low hum of a world that did not pause for quiet revelations. But inside that small room, time moved differently, slower, heavier, measured not in seconds, but in breaths and the space between them. Naomi did not speak. She did not need to. Her presence steady, her gaze soft but unwavering, and she watched him not with expectation, not with demand, but with a kind of patience that came from knowing the truth did not need to be forced once it had been seen. Ethan's fingers lowered slightly, brushing the edge of the bassinet for the briefest moment, the contact light, almost hesitant, as if he was testing whether he was allowed to exist in this space at all. And the small movement of his hand said more than any apology he could have spoken, because it carried uncertainty, humility, something unfamiliar to a man who had always moved with certainty. He exhaled again, slower this time, and when he finally stepped back, it was not in retreat, but in recognition, as if he understood that what stood before him was not something he could step over or away from, but something he had to step into, carefully, honestly. His gaze lifted slightly, not fully leaving the child, but shifting just enough to meet Naomi's eyes. And for a moment, the distance that had defined everything between them felt thinner, not gone, not resolved, but no longer insurmountable. "I was wrong," he said, the words quiet, unguarded, not shaped for an audience, not measured for impact, just spoken because they had nowhere else to go, and the room held them without echo, without judgment, letting them settle where they belonged. Naomi did not respond immediately, her expression unchanged, not because the words did not matter, but because she understood that words alone had never been the point, and she gave a small nod, not in forgiveness, not yet, but in acknowledgement, a recognition that something had shifted, something real. Ethan looked back down at the bassinet, his posture different now, not rigid, not controlled, but softer, as if the weight he carried had shifted from something he defended to something he accepted, and he remained there for another moment, letting the quiet exist without trying to fill it. Outside, the night stretched on, the city lights flickering in endless patterns, but inside, the light remained warm, steady, holding a stillness that felt complete in a way nothing else had that day. Ethan's hand lowered fully to his side, no longer hovering, no longer uncertain, and though he did not reach again, did not try to claim anything that had not yet been offered, he did not step away either. He stayed, present, grounded in a space he had once denied. Naomi turned slightly then, adjusting the blanket once more with the same gentle care, her movements calm, natural, and as she did, the baby shifted again, settling deeper into the quiet, the small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that asked for nothing but to be allowed to exist. Ethan watched that rhythm, not as an outsider anymore, not as someone separate from it, but as someone who had finally chosen to see it. And in that choice, something inside him stilled, not fixed, not redeemed entirely, but changed in a way that could not be undone. The room held that change without announcing it, without marking it as anything dramatic, just a quiet shift, a new presence where there had once been absence. And as the night continued beyond the walls, the light inside remained, soft and steady, illuminating not power, not status, but something far simpler, something he had almost missed and now could not ignore.